On this week's episode of Whitetail Cribs, we're stopping in Ohio to visit with Keith Snider once again. Keith has one of the most incredible private antler collections on earth. He gives us the full grand tour, tells us the stories of these deer, how he acquired them, and so much more. This is a really special episode. We hope you guys enjoy it. If you do, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe. Now let's get into the episode.
Nah, hey, come on down here. Let me show you something really special. This is where all the, I guess, my passion is. Now, these deer here are what most people would refer to as some of the greatest whitetails that's ever walked the earth. My name's Keith Snider, and I own the North American Monster Whitetail Collection. I've been collecting since I was about 13 years old, so 45 now. It's been a minute. First of all, I'll talk about some of my favorite heads, and I'll start off with my favorite head. Most people know this deer. It's killed in 1965. This is the Illinois Roadkill. It's the largest framed whitetail most people believe in the world that's ever hit the ground. Most people know the numbers, but I'll go through some of them with you. 31.4 beams. I think it's 29.7 on one side, 31.4 on the other. 31.4 wide. Had this tine growed here, he would have been one of the top typicals of all time. Barely makes Boone and Crockett at 176, but he is absolutely one of the greatest whitetails that's ever lived. Hands down, no doubt about it. 29 change inside. He's as good as they get. 6-inch mass measurements throughout, and his horns are absolutely the greatest quality horns if you're an antler collector like I have been for 30 years. Longer than I guess, but the horns are made of marble almost. They're like chiseled out of granite. These older deer, a lot of times the way their antlers mineralized, and it happens once in a great while in recent deer, but a lot of times deer grew from minerals, supplements, things like that. You know, this deer was eating just whatever was out there. So this is a deer that I've wanted since I was 10 years old, and it took a tremendous amount of work to get this deer. We'll jump off that subject and we'll go to this deer. This deer was actually from Arkansas, and it was the state record at one time. Again, the frame on it, 29 inches wide, but it's 22.5 inches tall off the head. It's got 12.5 inch brow tines, just tremendous collar. And the deer's sitting on a 194 3/8 net 4x4 frame, which is just out of this world. The color is tremendous. You know, it almost looks like an Alaskan king crab. There's so much beating and what have you on it. It's got a drop time. It's kind of really got a little bit of everything. But like I said, when you start measuring, for some of you guys that like big deer, measure from the bottom of the pedicle to the top of the G2. That tells you the height. And then, of course, the spread. This deer's over 32 inches wide and 22 inches tall. So when you think about how much real estate that takes up, that's just a tremendous amount of real estate. So these are just some of the biggest framed deer in the world here. If you pan around this way, this is a really special deer. This is a gentleman in Maine killed this deer, and it was at the time the Maine state record. I believe it still is, and they have a different record book than Boone and Crockett. But he was 12 years old when he shot this deer, and it was living right on the coast in Waldo County. And that's right on the ocean. And they would watch this deer eating seaweed back in, this would have been like 85, 86. And Chris just happened to be out on a deer hunt with his dad, ended up getting this deer at 12 years old. Can you imagine? The deer's over 22 inches tall. It's 24 inches wide inside, close to 28 outside. It has 15, 16 inch twos, 11, 12 inch threes. It's got 10, 11 inch brow tines, 32.4 beams, 6-inch mass. Actually has salt in the holes where the deer was down on the ocean eating seaweed and kelp, whatever, and just killed about a mile off the coast there. But this is probably the biggest 4x4 frame in the world. If you take this G4 off, he doesn't get no credit over here, so he's scored as a basic 4x4 as a typical. With all these abnormals, every one of these abnormals knocked off, plus this, plus these, all this stuff, he still makes the book at 184 as a 4x4. His frame is actually 202/8, which is the biggest in the world. Up here is a deer that was killed in Indiana by a young lady named Andrea Moffett. Became very, very well-known deer here in recent years, but it's possibly the biggest deer ever killed by a woman as far as sheer frame and real estate. The deer, actually, the sheds off of it from the year before are called the Indiana Legend sheds, and it's a 220-inch 10-pointer. But as this, he's only an 8-point and got a big flyer off the back and still is 188. And so, tremendous deer, goes over 200 as a 9-point. 24 inches inside, 16-inch 2s, 14-inch 3s, 30-inch main beams, and 6-inch mass. Tremendous, tremendous whitetail. This deer was actually killed by a friend of mine, and I was lucky enough for him that he wanted to see it in his collection, and his name is Dave Kopp. He's from up around Akron area, and this deer was on his father-in-law's property, and he went in there and come up with a game plan on how to harvest him, and was lucky enough to harvest this deer. But it's one of my favorite deer in the collection, just because Dave's such a great guy. He truly is one of those once-in-a-lifetime guys that you meet. He's just something special. But the deer was originally scored, and they sent him a score sheet at 287. Paneled it, and it was in the 260s, and long story short, finally, it's the biggest unicorn buck in the world. The actual point in the middle of the rack there comes out of the forehead. It's not on the antlers. It's actually coming out of the forehead. So it's a unicorn buck. It's got 15-inch tines on it. The bases are bigger than elk. I mean, they're 8 inches. And the collar's out of this world. It's kind of got snowflake, or icicle, I call them, drop tines coming off the beams. But it broke off a lot of inches before he was able to harvest that deer. And it's 24, I think, 25 inches inside. And just a tremendous, tremendous whitetail. And it's 273 is what it actually ended up scoring. So it's a tremendous whitetail. This whitetail here was killed by another friend of mine, James Spears, in Hamilton County back in 1999. And as far as I know, matching G2s, I don't know of any that are better. They're approaching at 18 inches. G3s are over 14 and a half, 15 inches. It's got 28, 29-inch main beams. Actually with a 200-inch 10-point, but it grew these stickers. And as you can see, this is one of those quality sets of antlers that I tell you about. The patina, and it's like hard enamel. The antlers are like that. You know, they're just so hard and polished. And he actually killed this deer right in just a little strip of woods that his buddy called him and said, "There's a deer out here standing. It's got 1.5 foot tines." He said, "No way." Strip of woods is maybe 150 yards wide or long and maybe 40 yards wide. And James went in there, put a drag rag in, hung a stand, went in the next morning. This deer come walking right through that woods, and there's houses on both sides of it right in Cincinnati. And James hit it perfect. And the woods was so small, the deer didn't want to run out in traffic, ran down through the woods, turned and ran back up, and expired just right there at his stand. And at the time, you know, the deer still, with all the abnormals kicked off and everything's in the high 80s. And then, you know, you can just go on down through here. You got the Jay Fancook from Ross County, 262. Jesse Fulton, 240 on a 200-inch frame. Danny Michaels from Kansas. It's a gross 275, net 264, officially in Boone and Crockett out of Franklin County, Kansas. Shot this deer with a rifle. I mean, it's got 7-inch bases. It's just a tremendous, tremendous deer. Eli Hostetler buck, shot in 1976 in Holmes County, Ohio, with a shotgun. And the people's favorite, the James Rath buck, probably one of the most beautiful racks of all time. This is the original James Rath. It was killed by Mr. Rath in Minnesota with a Ithaca 37 shotgun in his, basically on his farm there. And it was just about a 6-acre woodlot that was surrounded by thousands of acres of fields. And this deer, they would watch it in the summertime out eating when they were baling hay and things like that. And this deer was probably one of the most recognizable deer there is. They've sold hundreds of thousands of deer cows that go in the back of people's glasses that say Rathbuck. This is the animal that is. He was 3.5 years old when he was killed. So if you think about that, if you come around here and you look at the mass through this beam, we're talking 4 fingers wide. I mean, it's literally that big. 200-inch 10-point frame. The antlers and collar absolutely look like fire. It's the most beautiful rack maybe on the planet. It's just a tremendous, tremendous whitetail. On top is the Ohio mystery head. They believe it was found by a rabbit hunter. They believe it was hit by lightning, 288 inches. Just an incredible deer out of Coshocton. This is the Jerry Whitmire buck out of Illinois, and had it not had these, like in most cases, which is, the scoring system, it's funny that way when you think about it, because if we break these off, the deer's bigger. That doesn't make no sense, right? But as a 10-pointer, it still is 193, and had it not had these, it's a 200-inch 10-pointer, which would make it, there's only 3 of them in the world. So when you think about that, that's a tremendous whitetail. 15-inch 2s, 14-inch 3s, 9-inch brow tines, 7-inch G4s, 30-inch main beams, and 23 inches inside. Tremendous, tremendous whitetail. This deer here was killed in Morgan County, just the next county over, by Dan Junn in 1986. And it has 17-inch tines on it that are 5.5 inches around. As an 8-pointer, it goes 181, and he's only got a 1-inch G4 on one side. So he actually shot this deer with his family hunting, and this is one of the first deer that I've collected many, many years ago. I used to go into the gun shop, and they had that thing hanging on the wall. The ceilings weren't too tall, so they had it cut off right here at the neck so that it wouldn't hit the ceiling. And I said, one day I'm going to get that. And it took about 10 years, but I got him. Then the John Deere buck, guy shot it sitting on a John Deere tractor. I believe he was harvesting corn, shelling corn. Dorsey buck used to be number 3 in the state of West Virginia. The Harlan Suela buck out of Iowa, 240 inches. This deer, I believe, is from your guys' home county. This is one of my favorite deer when I was a kid, I'd go into the magazine stands and I would look at the whitetail books in North American Whitetail. This deer was on the cover. It's killed by a very good friend of mine now that I've gotten to know him, and he's a tremendous person. This is the Bob Haney buck from Mahoney County, and it holds the record at one time the world's largest 8-pointer, and still probably is the largest 8-point frame, because he's not a 9-point. He's an 8-point. This is an abnormal. Of course, his splits are an abnormal, couple stickers. The deer still makes the book as an 8-pointer at 180 1/8. His net 8-point frame is 196 5/8. There's none on the planet. I mean, that's as good as it gets. There's nothing bigger. And then you have the Vince Brock world record 8x8. He makes the book at 231 and makes the book at 190. He's unbelievable. He has a 210-inch typical frame. One of the most beautiful bucks ever. It's hard to see these deer back in here. And then you have the West Virginia state record, Ivan McLaughlin, 231, still holds the state record. And then this is a set of sheds out of Maine. It's a tremendous, tremendous whitetail too, 222. This is the biggest deer on the whole East Coast, from Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, Maine, clear down through New Hampshire, Vermont, New York, Pennsylvania, clear down through to Florida. This is the Bill Crutchfield buck. Come out of Maryland, about 30 miles from Washington, D.C. They called it the marsh monster. It was in the marsh over there. Anyhow, Bill harvested this deer. It's 268 2/8, I believe. Giant typical frame, and literally everything straight in the air. It's got pretty much anything that you or I think anybody else that whitetail hunts would say, yeah, that's the deer there. He's a tremendous whitetail. And Bill stood on an island, basically, just swamp everywhere, and shot this deer at like 80 or 100 yards open sights with a shotgun. And I can't imagine. He had seen the deer for hours and hours and hours, and finally was able to harvest it. I'll show you a few of these bucks here laying on the ground that aren't mounted yet. This is a deer out of Kansas. It goes 246. It's a great buck. There's no doubt about it. I mean, this is a deer that, when you go to Kansas, I guess that's probably what we're all hoping for. It's got 28 points on it, sitting on a mid 180s frame, 23 inches inside, and really, I mean, it's what we dream about, right? It's a great whitetail. It was actually picked up, found dead. This deer is really, really special. Oh, this pig of a deer is the Billy Joe Paget from Georgia. This is the Georgia state record. Would you look at the color on that deer? Unbelievable. The beating is second to none. The mass is over 7 inches on the second circumferences. To come out of Georgia, they're over 7 at the bases. It's one of the best quality racks in the world, period. The deer goes 248 inches, I believe, with just an 8-point frame. And I mean, the beading literally runs clear to the G4s on this deer. The mass through here, bigger than your forearm. But here's what's special. The beading, what we look for, you know, we're looking at ridging and everything. People that love antlers. This deer was killed about 60 yards from where the world record bass was caught by George Perry in 1922 at Lake Montgomery. Something in the water in Georgia, boys. As big as they get. And the antler quality is out of this world. Oh, come on over here. This is a deer that was killed in Vinton County by an old boy. Now this is a pig of a deer. This deer was actually just scored by Boone and Crockett, and the old man shot it out of a corn crib behind his house with a 16 gauge single shot H&R shotgun. The typical frame's over 220. His net typical frame's 216 and 2/8, which would be 3 inches bigger than the world record. He grew some abnormals, obviously. Knock all the abnormals off. We're talking this. I believe that's it. Not only that, he broke off that great big drop tine, As it is, the deer nets 196 and 0/8 typical, which puts it number 3 in the state of Ohio. But add all the abnormals on to that net typical frame of 216 and 2/8, he nets 241 inches non-typical. So this deer makes the book at 241 or 196, which has never been heard of. So that's how big that deer is. He actually rubbed his beams flat because he could not eat. So only an 18-inch inside spread, but I mean, would you look at the side profile of that deer? Both sides, I mean, it's just as good as it gets. 31-inch beams. It's an unbelievable whitetail. The gentleman didn't mount it or anything. He was an old man, and he actually passed away, and it was sold in his estate. This deer is a very famous deer. This is the Ken Cartwright, 253 inches. Probably one of the most beautiful non-typicals you'll ever see. His frame's 210 net, typical, which only put him 3 inches away from a world record. Tremendous brow tines. Ken Cartwright lives in Kansas. This was the Kansas deer here, and he actually broke off part of his drop tine over here, or it probably would have been another 5 to 6 inches long. But anyhow, Ken shot this deer with, you know, not the best bow in the world by any means. I believe he bought it from a pawn shop. And don't quote me on everything here, but I believe this was just a couple miles down the road from his house, and a neighbor had said, "Hey, there's a big deer went across the road. You ought to hunt there, Ken." Ken says, "Well, I'm going to go get in a stand down there or climbing a tree." And lo and behold, this deer walks through. He shoots it. It runs across the pasture, crosses the road. He walks up on it. The deer stands up. He shoots it again, and then he realizes that this isn't just a normal deer. It's one of the greatest whitetails of all time. 24 inches inside, 30-inch beams, 210 typical frame, and absolutely everything that you would want in a non-typical. Drop tines, drop beams, huge typical frame, giant beaded brow tines, burr stickers, and it was left on a full skull. Just an unbelievable deer. Let's walk around here and I'll show you the best that I have in my collection. Let's start off with this deer right here. This is the Pennsylvania state record, the Kairos buck, 1962. It's a 220, gross typical. Ends up netting, after all the abnormals and side-to-side difference and everything, 202 and 7/8, Boone and Crockett. Tremendous weight, and this deer was actually bought at a garage sale, believe it or not. Top 5 in the world. You can see the patina and everything on it. It's just a beautiful deer. And the old man passed away, and his wife actually sold it at a garage sale with some other antlers, and it finally got into the hands of a collector, and now it's in my collection. So it's an unbelievable head. What most people want to see when they come down here is this deer behind me. I still just am in awe when I come down and look at this deer. This is the General from Nebraska. He's got 33-inch matching beams. He is the biggest whitetail ever known to walk the planet. It's a set of sheds found from Nebraska, but when you give the inside spread, and had he had no inside spread, he still would almost beat the world record with no spread. But with the spread in that 240 area and with side-to-side differences and the abnormal brow tine, the deer will net in the mid 220s. He's got 7.5 inch mass through his beams. His G3 on the left side's over 14, and it really is just the most beautiful whitetail that I know of. Not in my opinion, as far as just eye appeal, sheer size, beauty, sweeping beams, just the antler quality, the sheer configuration of his rack, and the sheer overall size. There's nothing that compares. Everything hails in comparison, and really they should have named him the president or something like that, because general is not the highest ranking, I guess, is it? So, and he definitely is. That's the greatest whitetail. Now these deer here, a gentleman friend of mine named Klaus Lebrecht, he does the finest replicas in the world. These are deer that are in Bass Pro Shops Museum, but these are the finest replicas that he's ever made. Normally, you know, it takes him 3 or 4 hours to paint a replica. These were his personal mounts and replicas, and I wanted them for my collection because I wanted the very best. These deer, this is the Jordan buck, and it held the world record for over 80 years. You know, you're talking about deer that are way in the 6 figures, like tremendously into the 6 figures and approaching 7 figures in some cases. This deer cannot be bought. Bass Pro Shop will never let go of this deer at all. So Klaus had the original and spent 7 days to collar that, when it only takes about an hour and a half to collar one. And every mark on this deer, everything about it is exactly like the original. So this replica would be priceless as far as a work of art. It would be the first print of the greatest print of the Mona Lisa there is. So, you know, I'm very, very privileged and thrilled that Klaus gave me the opportunity to put these in my collection, because I love the Jordan buck, but unfortunately I'll never own the Jordan buck, I know, so this is just the next best thing. This is the Indiana Legend Sheds. This is the 225 set of antlers, or 220 10-pointer. The deer above it is a deer I actually shot that scores 185 4/8, and it's 24 inches wide. That should give you a little idea of how big the Indiana Legend Moffett sheds are. It's a 29.7 inside. It has, this is the world record 5-point antler at 100 inches basically. And, you know, with the inside spread, like I say, the deer would net 210 inches. So it'd be the biggest 5x5 of all time, easily. This is one of my favorite deer of all time. This is the John Breen buck from 1918 in Minnesota. Got big sled sweeping beams, and most people refer to him to the most beautiful 10-pointer ever. This again is one of Klaus's replicas. It cannot be bought. It's in Bass Pro Shops. Again, Klaus spent 6-7 days to color this, put it on $1,500 mount, and gave me the opportunity to put it in my collection. And these were his personal pieces of artwork that were in his house, so I feel very privileged to have that in my collection also. It's one of my favorite deer of all time, and to me and to most people, you know, you're talking about these deer in this room right here are all 7-figure deer if you could even buy them. So, you know, that deer's $1 million deer, that deer's $1 million deer, and that deer's $1 million deer. And if you think about it, if you take the top 10 of anything, I don't care if it's a set of tennis shoes, they sell for over $1 million. Now you're talking about something that people can't wrap their mind around, but it's a $60 billion a year revenue, whitetail deer hunting. Why wouldn't you think that the greatest of all would be worth a mere $1 million? So, to me, they're priceless. You couldn't get them for anything, but they do hold tremendous value, and it's what I feel comfortable sinking my money into. I enjoy it. Everybody has something that relieves stress, and they may go talk to their dad. They may go talk to a psychiatrist. When I get stressed out about everyday life that gets everybody down, whether it be work, you know, just struggles that we all have, I come down here, and this is where my stress is relieved. I can just look up here and just everything's lifted off of me. So it's pretty awesome. anyway, that's all that I have right now, and you guys stop back and hopefully we can look at some more.